Chapter 6 Fallen. Within the duplicated moment of Dr. Gaster's, this silent pocket of space and time, all that remained was a single patch of moonlight. The rest of the room had been consumed by the surging dark, so thick it was almost glossy, like solid walls of ink. Frisk held his ground between the two thrones. The child remained where he was on the opposite end of the circle, half inside that pulsing shadow.
You know who I am.
It wasn't a question. Frisk did. He'd heard that soft, high voice before, in the fuzz-choked background of the laboratory tapes, and the whispering flowers in Waterfall's grotto. And somewhere else, somewhere he still couldn't place.
Good. That makes this very simple.
The hand remained extended.
Thank you for preserving that soul. As I followed in your wake, I was concerned that I would not be able to retrieve it before it shattered. Monsters are such fragile things, don't you agree?
Frisk didn't answer.
But I'm here now, and I would very much like to take Asriel back.
The air had become strangely stagnant, almost syrupy. Frisk had to fight for every breath. It burned cold in his throat. The child said,
You're afraid of me.
He was. He was afraid of how the child remained so still he might as well have been carved from marble, the only movement coming from his mouth as he spoke. He was afraid of how the child's words didn't quite match the way his mouth moved, like someone doing an imperfect ventriloquist act. And as he talked, there was a second voice behind the familiar one, a rotted harmonic that made Frisk's stomach churn. It sounded like a hissing fuse, or the buzzing of wasps, or the silence before an avalanche. Mindless noise contorting itself into speech, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once.
It's all right to be scared. That provides incentive.
The child's smile widened.
Give me what I want, and then I'll go away.
He could feel his heart beating against the walls of his chest as if fighting for escape. His knees threatened to give out. But he straightened himself up, lowered his hand from his heart, and shook his head. The child's outstretched hand spasmed like an insect.
No?
The hand lowered.
How curious.
The shadows jumped again, chewing away at the moonlight's periphery.
After seeing the way you've acted, I thought negotiation would be worth a try. It seems I was mistaken.
He brought out his other hand. Frisk saw the knife it held, the blade haloed in a faint red glow.
Oh well.
The child started to walk, slow, shuffling steps, like someone walking with their eyes shut. He seemed uncomfortable in his own skin. Frisk fumbled out his stick. His hand shook so badly he nearly dropped it. The shadows behind him pushed hungrily forward. There was not a breath of wind.
Every life has value, and so does every death.
He trod in Asriel's dust. It kicked up a gray glimmer that trailed in his wake.
I wonder.
He raised the knife.
What will yours give me?
Whoa there, kids. No roughhousing in the throne room. Frisk yelped and spun on his heel. Sans was there, leaning up against Toriel's throne, hands in his hoodie pockets. The white pinpricks of his pupils and the smooth bone of his skull seemed to glow. For an instant, the child's smile twisted, turned feral, but he stopped advancing. "Aya, Frisk," said Sans. "Sorry I took so long." His pupils swiveled to meet the child's gaze. "I leave you alone for 10 minutes in a place that didn't exist 10 minutes ago, and you already made a new friend. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were just showing off." He sauntered forward, past Frisk, and stood between him and the child. On the way, he gave Frisk's shoulder a brief squeeze. "I decided to check up on this place after saying my goodbyes, and boy, was the path twisted. Almost like someone was trying to cover their tracks. Good thing I'm used to finding shortcuts." He winked at the child. "Hi there. Name's Sans. Sans the skeleton." The child had discreetly tucked the knife behind his back again.
Greetings. I'm...
Shush!
Sans' pupils blinked out. His eye sockets turned black as space. I don't need you to tell me who you are. There's only one other human who'd ever be in the underground at this point in time. And I worked in the core laboratory, butto. You'd think a diligent guy like myself didn't flip through those tapes in the break room every now and then? Those sure were some sad home movies I found. The child's grip on the knife tightened. Frisk could hear the tendons in his hand creak. Never told the king what I heard on those tapes. It would have broken his big burly heart. But I know you've been a naughty boy. Or maybe I'm actually wrong? Sans' knuckle cracked inside his pockets. The child tilted his head inquisitively. Looking at you, he said, I get a familiar feeling. Something that chills me right down to the bone. I don't think even a permanent softy like Asgore would have ever mistaken you for a human.
What a strange thing to say.
The child's head remained tilted.
I'm clearly not a monster. So if I'm not human, then what am I?
Hey, that sounds like a riddle. Riddles are great. They're like knock-knock jokes that went to college. Here, I'll throw out a guess and you can say if I'm hot or cold. Ready? Sans' voice acquired a sinister reverb.
You're a dirty brother killer.
For a moment, the child remained frozen. Then, by inches, he lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake as if he was suppressing laughter. But it was the darkness around Sans and Frisk that laughed. Mirth slid in and out through the shadows like a tangle of snakes. He said,
That's right.
The harmonic Frisk had heard was no longer trying to hide itself. It jumped up and smothered the child's original voice. It slithered into their ears and spread throughout their skulls. The knife came out again. The child looked up. Locks of hair at last slid away from his eyes like mud.
To tell the truth, I'm no longer certain of what I am.
Eyes so dark they seemed to be all pupil, and that blackness wouldn't remain still. It moved, wet and slug-like, as he stared them down.
But, despite everything, it's still me.
Frisk. Sans edged closer to the thrones. Might be a good idea to stay behind me right now.
There's no need to be so protective. We were in the middle of a bargain. The terms were straightforward. All I want is Asriel's soul back. Then I'll leave you alone.
Well, gee, that actually sounds pretty reasonable. Sans glanced over his shoulder. What do you say, kid? Want to give the spooky little squirt Asriel's soul? Frisk clutched his chest and shook his head, eyes wide as they would go. Oof, didn't even hesitate. Sans turned back to the child. Hey, I think Frisk's playing hardball. Got anything to sweeten the deal? The child didn't answer. He remained motionless. Then, Frisk heard the scrape of a shoe behind him. He turned and saw those dark and crawling eyes mere inches from his own, the child's hand reaching out to grab him. A scream rose in his throat as Sans grabbed Frisk's shirt, pulled him back. Beads of perspiration sparkled on Sans' brow.
Frisk, don't you recognize my voice?
Frisk tried to look away, but the child seemed to appear everywhere he looked.
Whenever you reset the timeline, whenever you remade this world anew, I was there, in the shadow of your determination. I spoke into your ear. I gave you the will to continue. Again, and again, and again.
Frisk felt unseen eyes crawling on his back.
I had hoped that, as time wore on, you would eventually call my name and let me in. I waited so long for my opportunity. But even now, I cannot find the rot in your thoughts. I cannot find the cracks in your heart. I cannot find a grip on your soul. How strange, how sad. There is no love in you at all. Nevertheless, it seems you found your way in the end. I am impressed. Your determination and my encouragement led us to the ending we desired. And now, I am owed for my efforts. I'll keep Asriel safe. It won't be like last time. Give me the soul. Give it to me.
What we have here is a little boy who can't take no for an answer, Sans said.
Sans.
Frisk clutched at him.
It's so cold.
I know, kid. He couldn't feel the chill himself, but Frisk was shivering against him hard enough to make Sans's bones vibrate. Just hang in there.
He's right. I heard him.
He glanced to the left. The child was there. He glanced to the right. The child was there.
Whenever I did one of the big resets, for a couple of seconds, I didn't feel like I was anywhere, but I heard him talking.
I am there wherever determination can be found. I am there whenever someone calls my name. And I am always, always listening.
You say that, but I think my brother managed to pin you down. Sans's left eye sparkled as he tried to focus on the child. You're the anomaly, ain't ya? You're the one who was hunting us.
Call me whatever you like. Only my name matters. The rest is noise.
The darkness giggled again.
And what happened in there was self-defense. It was, as you said, those experiments created a two-way window. The same power that Doctor used to strike at me gave me a chance to strike back. You would have done the same.
A tick went off in Sans's cheekbone. His eye began to flare. But then Frisk said,
It wasn't you.
Excuse me?
You didn't tell me to reset. I made that choice myself.
Though he was still quivering, he stepped out from behind Sans.
I don't know what you did to Sans's friends, but I'm the one who's been hurting everyone else. You shouldn't blame yourself for that.
I shouldn't blame myself?
The child's smile remained rigid, but the darkness cringed back, as if confused.
I'm going to give Azrael's soul back to him, if he'll take it. You can talk to him then, right?
That's not what I asked for.
The shadows lashed back. For an instant, the child's lip lifted up, exposing his teeth.
You don't get to compromise with me. Give me what I want. Do it now.
Sans stepped forward. I think we're going around in circles. He said he's not giving you the soul. And let me tell you from experience, Frisk doesn't say anything he doesn't mean. Do you want me to write it out? He withdrew one hand, waved his notebook. Got pen and paper right here. A low, dissonant tone, like stereo feedback, shook the ground beneath their souls. The child's smile was fading fast. Then he brightened up again.
An amusing thought occurs to me.
Oh, cool. Lay it on me.
It was your brother who opened the way to this place, wasn't it? That broken man.
Sans stiffened.
You know, he was doing very well in that laboratory. He might have successfully ended me if you hadn't arrived and given me the opportunity I needed. And then you came to save him, only to make him sacrifice himself. Twice you tried to help him. Twice you only helped him to his death.
The child's eyes writhed.
Isn't that funny, comedian? This is where you're supposed to laugh.
Sans did. It wasn't particularly cheery, but his long, low chuckle was sincere, and enough to eradicate the last of the child's smile. He stood at the edge of the darkness, looking lost and alone. Oh man, if you're trying to get under my skin, then you've got your work cut out for you. He wiped at his socket and sighed. Yeah, I screwed up. WD's gone now, and there's no amount of resets that'll ever get him back. But I've said my goodbyes. And let me tell you something. I couldn't have asked for a better send-off than what I got. I've made my peace. Understand me? Frisk kept looking back to make sure the child wasn't sneaking up on him again. He, too, felt more relaxed, in spite of the thick, freezing atmosphere. I've fallen back into a lot of old habits lately, thanks to this kid. He jabbed a thumb back at Frisk. Hitting the books again. Using math puns, man. I've got to stop that. Even I have standards. It's a really worrying sign. See? There I go again. And, he added, I seem to keep making promises. That's never a good idea. Because if you make a promise, then you've got to keep it, no matter what, right? The child said nothing. But hey, let's have one more for the road. I'm willing to let bybones be bybones with what you did in that lab. But if you try to make a move on Frisk here, if you take one more step, then buddy, I can promise you this. Sans stuck his hands back in his hoodie pocket. His slippers scuffed against the ground.
You're gonna have a bad time.
The stagnant air filled with the sound of rattling bones. The child held his ground for a long while. The long fang of the knife seemed to suck in what remained of the light. Shadows crept through the grass like worms. Then the child stepped back.
Fine. I'll leave.
The rattling ceased. Sans blinked. He seemed surprised.
Given the circumstances, a different path may be better suited.
The child cupped his hand under his chest.
Take your prize, and don't worry about me. Now, I can find my own way.
Light spilled out around the child's heart, that diseased and bloody red. Somehow it only intensified the dark. Every black tendril leapt and warped like silhouettes in a candle flame. It stained the child's grinning face, made him look hollow, doll-like.
Now, I don't need any of you.
Another freezing shadow passed over the room. There was a thud. When the room cleared again, moonlight once again found itself in all the proper places. The throne room was streaked with silver, and, several feet away, the child's body lay crumpled in the garden, the knife in the grass at his side. Its edge was still wickedly sharp, but that red aura, too, had gone. Sans exhaled. He wiped his skull dry with his sleeve. Then he saw Frisk dart out from around him and run to the child's body, too fast for Sans to pull him back. Wait, Frisk, that's a really bad idea! But Frisk had already knelt beside the body, turned it over in the grass. The child's dark eyes were still wide open, but that unnatural, oily look had left them. They were cloudy and lusterless, the pupils normally sized. His skin was as cold as clay. He was still smiling faintly. Sans, what happened to him? Frisk shook him, to no avail. Isn't there anything we can do? You're pulling my leg. Sans didn't sound amused. Kid, I know you've got a great big mushy heart, but come on. He'd have killed you if I hadn't shown up. He stepped over to the other side of the child's body. And unlike most of the other folks who've tried to kill you, or will try, whatever, time travel, tenses go out the window. I doubt he would have felt too broken up about it after. Frisk stared into those blank eyes. Behind them, Asriel's dust shifted in eddies from the growing breeze. They were friends, he said quietly. It must have been for a reason. Yeah? Does human friendship usually involve suicide pacts? Honestly curious. I don't want to seem culturally insensitive. I don't know. Let's overlook the fact that he killed my brother, okay? Let's just try to sidestep that whole issue. Sans' voice had turned biting. He got Asriel killed. By the sound of it, he would have gotten a whole lot of humans killed too. Maybe even monsters, assuming that whole plan of theirs touched off another war. This little punk's caused humans and monsters more trouble than anyone else since the barrier first went up. And now he's back up and talking my ear off while WD is dust? Far as I'm concerned, kids like him should be burning in... Frisk glared up at him. Well, you get my point. Frisk looked back down at the child. He sniffled. Sans stared at them both, and, little by little, the hard edges around his eye sockets smoothed out. Lying motionless like that, and next to Frisk's equally tiny frame, the child looked a great deal less threatening than he'd been before, in the midst of all that taunting darkness. Sans sighed. Let me just... He bent over and closed the child's eyes. There, was giving me the creeps. He stood back up and shoved his hands in his pockets. There's nothing else we can do here now, he said, and I doubt that he's really gone. That goodbye of his was awfully ominous.
I think he got his soul back,
Frisk said.
Right after I found Asriel's. But somehow he was following me. All this time.
No wonder he looked so happy then. Sans stared up at the ceiling. It still felt like he was being watched. Then he turned around and made his way to the thrones. Dunno how that's even possible, but I've had enough impossible stuff shoved down my neck hole today already. Come on, Frisk. I don't want to hang around here any longer.
Coming.
Frisk saw something shimmer at the child's neck and bent in closer. He gently pulled aside the collar of his shirt and saw it, a fine gold chain, thin as thread, cool against his skin. He tugged it up and out and exposed a heart-shaped locket, the pendant no bigger than his thumbnail. It was a little more tarnished and scratched than the one he'd found in Asriel's bedroom, but it was still clearly that necklace's twin. Frisk glanced back up. Sans was peering into the shadows between the thrones, notebook in hand. He slipped the necklace off the child's neck, pocketed it, and walked up to Sans. All right, seems the spatial tunnel's a lot less convoluted now, Sans muttered. WD might have had trouble finishing his projects, but I know for a fact he'd leave us a way out of this little bubble. Let's get out of here before it pops. He replaced the notebook and offered his hand. Frisk took it. Hold on real tight, kiddo. They stepped into the dark and left Asriel's and the child's remains behind. Again, that feeling of motionless movement, that sensation of being nowhere at all. For a time, Frisk was aware only of Sans's hand over his own. Then, light crashed in on him with such sudden ferocity that his already squinted eyes almost tunneled into his face from shock. He hissed through his teeth and clapped a hand over his face. The air he breathed was bitter cold. After waiting several seconds to make sure he hadn't gone blind, he lowered his hand. They were back outside the cave near Snowdon, where Sans had blown open the door that, it had to be assumed, was not presently feeling extraordinarily grateful. Frisk was closer to the cliff's edge than he would have liked, and the evergreens below jutted from the earth like teeth. He took a hasty step back, then turned and saw Sans standing there with his head propped against the cool stone of the cliffside, taking deep, shuddering breaths. Frisk crept up to him and tugged on his sleeve. Without looking around, he raised one arm, made a circle with his thumb and forefinger. I'm okay, kid. Just need to get the old composure back. Busy morning. He sucked wind a few more times, then angled his head around. I think we're in the clear. You can put that thing away now. Frisk raised his eyebrows in puzzlement, then looked down at the stick still clutched in his hand. He hadn't let go of it since the child had first threatened him. It took him considerable effort to relax his fingers. I got a couple of notes on that twig. Is it seriously the same one you've had since the first time? He put the stick away.
I think so.
And it still hasn't broken, huh? It must be as determined as you are. He turned around fully and leaned against the wall. Speaking of which, Sans touched Frisk's chest with one bony finger. What's it like being one of the only humans to ever grab a monster's soul? The finger slid up and gently flicked Frisk's nose. He flinched and rubbed his face. Feel any unimaginable power in that little torso of yours? Frisk touched his heart.
No, it just feels warm.
That's even better. Power's boring, but no one wants to be cold.
I thought I'd hear him talking. It sounded like that's what happened when he and his friend went to the surface. But it's like he's asleep.
Yeah, well, he's had a long day too. Plus, he's technically existing in two places and times at once right now, so I don't know if that affects anything. He scratched the side of his skull. All we can do is hope for the best. So what's the plan?
I'm going to do everything again. Then, when it's over, I'll visit Asriel.
Frisk's expression was resolute.
I'll talk to him then.
Sounds good to me. Space-time ought to be untangled, so we can take a shortcut back to Papyrus. I'll tell him you japed me. He'll be overjoyed at the chance to match wits with such a dastardly human. His pupils skittered over to a nearby patch of shadow. As for your little smiley playmate, I'll keep an eye socket out for him. If he is out there somehow, he hopefully won't try any funny business while I'm around. Hey, leaving already? Frisk had walked off, but he didn't proceed up the cliff. Instead, he made his way to Gift Trot, who'd wandered in from a nearby copse of trees. He pawed nervously at the snow as Frisk approached. His mandibles clenched and unclenched. His head was festooned with a cornucopia of tasteless tchotchkes. Frisk reached up to his antlers. He looked ready to attack until he caught a glimpse of Sans' expression. He then stood very still as Frisk liberated him from the tyranny of an old pocket watch, a stuffed bird, a wrapped sugar box, and a comically squeaky rubber haunch of meat. Once the knickknacks were successfully vanquished, Frisk patted him on the head and stepped back.
"Thanks,"
said Gift Trot. Frisk waved goodbye and headed up the mountain. "Wait for me by the tunnel, Frisk," Sans called. "I'll take care of things from there."
"He, seems nice,"
Gift Trot remarked. "Yeah," said Sans. "I think so too." Sans took one last look into the cave. That bluestone door stood silent and enigmatic as it had ever been. Wherever it truly led, if it someday opened, it would only lead to that place ever again. He removed a whoopee cushion from his hoodie and kneaded it in his palm. Gift Trot saw it and narrowed all four of his eyes.
"Keep that thing off my head."
"What, this?" Sans held up the whoopee cushion. "Sorry, Gif. I'd never hand this over. It's got sentimental value."
"You skeletons are a couple of freaks. Anyone ever tell you that?"
Sans shrugged and replaced the cushion. "Hey, what can I say?" He sauntered past Gift Trot and up the slope, where Frisk was waiting. "I guess it runs in the family."